Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to us today. Today, in our studio on BelDiasporaTV is Alison Cameron, a Scottish woman who have had a big experience with Belarus for over 30 years. And today she will tell us about her life in Belarus. Alison, hello. Thank you very much for coming.
Привітання.
Привітання. Alison, I am wondering, you are from Scotland. 30 years ago, Belarus was hardly on a map. I mean, it was a little bit, but it was the country that just broke out of Soviet Union, just started some sort of democratic changes, just started to do something. And then it was the Chernobyl nuclear disaster that put Belarus on a map as a disaster zone. How did you appear there?
As if by magic. No, I think because of this very lack of understanding in the West as to the very existence of Belarus, even as a separate Soviet republic. Because in the minds of many, and this is still the case, there was only Russia, and the whole of the Soviet Union was Russia. And I get annoyed about this. It's like calling me English. It's worse than calling me English because I'm certainly not English. I'm Scottish. So I kind of get that thing. So the background is that I graduated in Russian during the 80s. So studied in Russia for about a year and then came out with my degree in my early 20s and got a job in Aberdeen, which is my home city. It's the Gorod Pobratym, so twin city of Homil. And I came into my new job running international relations for the city, the authorities in my city. And they said, well, we're really glad that you speak Russian because we're about to become twin cities with a Russian city. And I thought, well, Aberdeen is a major oil city. It's the oil capital of Europe. So it will probably be Tumian or somewhere, obviously oil related. And they said it's called Gomil. So I knew enough about Soviet, it was still the Soviet Union, obviously 1990, the very end. And I didn't want to speak out of turn on my first day, and I was in my early 20s and I was kind of really nervous. So I said, well, there are two things here I would just like to say. One, it's not in Russia. They were looking at me like, and two, have you looked on a map? And they said, no. I said, well, it seems to me to be the center of one of the two majorly contaminated zones within the within the Belarusian Republic. And it was too late. They'd gone and agreed, probably over vodka and whiskey somewhere. They'd met some of these chinovniki from Belarus, and they declared eternal friendship without actually realizing. So, but I'm very glad they did because it changed my life completely. And it meant that people like those politicians, they were not interested in going on a free holiday to the contaminated zone. So the people that got involved had a serious interest in either the science, the medical side, or the people, what people were going through. So it gave us a big opportunity to do some really adventurous and meaningful things. A lot of the Twin Cities stuff is ceremonial, really. You turn up at cultural events, make speeches and go home.
Absolutely.
But it's like that with Belarus.
Now we are I can't say celebrate, we commemorate the 35 years since the Chernobyl.
Yeah.
So it's a long time after, and I think new generation hardly understand what it is. There are many people who brought up, obviously, after the Chernobyl and even suffering consequences of the Chernobyl still don't understand what they're suffering from. So you remember that time when it all was quite raw and open and at the same time suppressed and covered. But how did you find out about that experience dealing with the people? Did you actually go into the zone, or what was your role?
Yeah. I don't think this was all what I chose to do and how I chose to be involved. I don't think this was on my job description, to be honest, but I've always been passionate about helping people find their voice, and people that have been silenced and so on. And this obviously reflects some of my own personal experiences. So I was always going to be getting involved beyond the boundaries of my job description. So I was sent there first in 1990. And the view of our very wealthy city and the authorities, the views were that these poor people need our help, and we are going to send them stuff without necessarily checking out with those people what their views were. And, you know, we are going to be helping the Chernobyl victims and so on. So I went there really to find out for myself what was really going on there. And so I spent a lot of time there on my own, so I didn't have to bother looking after politicians or whatever. So I could do my own thing, which included getting someone to drive me into the zone for the first time, you know, talking to, first thing I have pop into my mind is meeting young national service recruits who were guarding the entrance to the severely contaminated zone. And these were teenagers, as far as I could see. So they were stationed right at the very border of where it was deemed completely deadly with cesium and strontium. But also they said, I heard them one say to the other, we better get them out of here quickly because there's plutonium here. And yet those young people were standing there. They obviously weren't from a wealthy family that could bribe their way to safer posting. Also, the cows grazing in fields directly on the fence where the contaminators are. So it's like someone sat and drew a line and said, right here it's life-threateningly dangerous, and on this side of the fence is perfectly fine.
Completely all right. That's a great assumption.
Yeah, and so I mean, all the cattle and so on, that would be going into the food chain, and it was going throughout, you know, Russia, the Baltic states, etc. I have a very distinct memory of this wonderful woman from Hormill. She took me to meet exactly the right people, and they never knew we were coming, so none of it was a Pachonkin village. It was all absolutely raw, as you said, and very authentic. So I'd been told that everyone had been evacuated, and it was officially, you know, stamped. Everything has to have a stamp on it. That they were evacuated, and this Natasha, she took me to show exactly what the reality was. So we drove into the zone. I mean, it meant having to bribe like several people en route, but we did get in there. And this is 4 years after, there was a village, and the people there were still waiting to be evacuated. They had all their stuff on trucks, like loaded up. So they weren't the people who had refused to be evacuated because they didn't want to leave their hometown. They wanted out there, but they were, so because they were officially evacuated, they had closed down all the services, and so there was nothing. It was a dead village, and people were living there. And there was one older lady, a lovely babushka, and if you want wisdom and you know, go to the babushka. She said, I'm digging up potatoes with my bare hands, and I did this during the war when the Germans came, but this time it's worse because then I knew what I was fighting against. I could see the enemy, and I cannot see this enemy. And their kind of almost stoic acceptance that they'd been let down by their authorities, like it was just normal, really struck me. You know, they weren't protesting, they weren't, you know, they were just waiting. And this, to me, echoes a lot, I think, of the Belarusian experience.
It's definitely the echo of 1937. It's echo of the war, but it's also echoing that state without the law, without a proper law and regulations for people,
Yeah.
all the regulations and law was actually very much against people or for the rules themselves, but not for the people who were living. So it was a terrible tragedy that followed after Chernobyl, the realization that society is not prepared to help its citizens. That was the terrible shock for us too.
I think, Gorbachev had been elected, that were not elected. He was in power the year before. And he was certainly using the right words, of, say, particularly with reference to this, glasnost. But you cannot just have regime change by simply plonking somebody who knows the right words at the top, because the whole culture is completely entrenched. And that was the Soviet system, which was based on secrecy. And they got the officials, the town officials, out first. So they were concerned about some people, but only those deemed worthy. I mean, the fact that they had people out on the streets rehearsing for the May Day parade. And it
was terrible. It was just crime against humanity.
At the very least, they should have been told to stay inside, wash their hair, and if possible, get hold of seaweed tablets for the iodine to protect the thyroid, all of those things. But that would have meant admitting that it had happened. And of course, I developed this skill as well through being involved with the Soviet Union. I got used to reading between the lines. So it's like as soon as the buses were seen, those high ups from the town hall getting bussed away, like people knew, and yet they still did their duty by going out, and they had the flags, but they had no flags for the rehearsal. And for some reason that seems so symbolic. It's like we're out, we're meant to be, glory to the Soviet Union, but the flags have gone. So. And that really...
There was so much grotesque and so much irony, and it's I don't know, it's like Chekhov, you watch it, you don't know, you're crying or you're laughing.
Humor, I really appreciate it, because we're like that in Scotland. So you might think, oh my God, that's just not funny, but some of it, and it's a survival mechanism, and I really admire people for having that attitude. I mean, things like they got the sheep out before the people, because sheep absorb radiation a hell of a lot. So they took the sheep out before the people, and the amount of anecdote around this thing with the sheep, it was just, I saw, but the thing that's most important for me that still impacts on my work now, as I'm very much involved with the current situation in Belarus and helping where I can, the opposition movement, largely as concerns women through the Belarus Women's Foundation. I noticed the strength of people there. I had kind of expected to see victims, but actually, the more I went there, so throughout 1990, back and forth between Scotland, sometimes with the scientists and so on, as I said, I began to be aware of groups forming, of like self-organization starting to happen. And this was a new thing, because everything was state controlled, as you know. So for people to be setting up these independent self-help groups, it might be through a church. I visited all the different denominations. The only one I couldn't get anywhere near was the Orthodox the Orthodox Church. The Catholics were amazing. I met Seventh-day Adventists, all sorts of, and the Baptists were incredible. They were setting up hospital counselling services to everybody, not just their own. And I thought, this is something. Now, key players in all of this were women.
That's true.
Not just to be because they were mothers. You see, mothers. There was a group called Mothers of Children with Cancer. And they were the most incredible people. So I always had it in mind, and have had for 31 years, that in change in Belarus, women were going to play a significant role. And look where we are now. With
that's very true. It's not surprising to me, because women played a huge role after the war as well, and during the Second World War. And I think the men's population somehow in Belarus was always kind of going the wrong direction. Either it was alcoholism,
There was that.
or then later on it was that sort of fight and banditism of the 90s. And then they went with Lukashenko into completely different scenario and becoming oppressors. And a huge amount of men works now in security services, Lukashenko army, security forces, and goes fighting. And strangely enough, I don't know why they don't remember Afghanistan, for instance, when they did work with Russia very closely. And look what happened. Half of the Belarus was gone due to
One of
fighting Afghanistan.
actually was mothers of
Yes.
veterans who had come back from Afghanistan in a complete state of trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So men were going through these horrible experiences, and they were sort of traumatized and very much played not a very social part in the society. But women had to stay strong, had to raise children, had to go into groups and help and support each other. And women are carrying forward whatever we have left from Belarusian society now, and still do. And there are a huge amount of women volunteering to help in prisons, to help people who came out of torture chambers in Belarus, to help people to bring back the balance, in psychological balance. But how did you find it at that time after Chernobyl? How did those women accept you? Did you speak Russian? How did you manage?
We just got on really well. I don't know if I even needed to be able to speak Russian. I have gradually absorbed a lot of Belarusian, which is a really beautiful language. It's much softer, less harsh than Russian, and just in my humble opinion. So I just, what really struck me was just how genuinely grateful they were that somebody living, right in another country, really could see and hear them. I think I don't belong to any particular church and so on, but I realized that the churches were providing real support for people. So I helped them irrespective of what I thought of their, doctrines or so on. So I got invited to the Baptists, and I had brought some religious books that some organization had asked me to take. So I took them into this church, and I thought I'd just go there and leave the things and go, but no, they had summoned the entire congregation. And I'd never been to a Baptist thing before, and I wasn't really prepared for the kind of emotional response from these people. And that in the Baptist, you can kind of just open your mouth and say it, anything that you feel that it's, So they had me up on the pulpit. I stood there and I spoke in Russian, and they all stood up, but it was very, very overwhelming. And they sang. I had the two clinicians with me who were Christian from Scotland. They sang a hymn to the people, and they responded back because they knew that hymn, they knew the music, but they sang it in Russian back. And then by this time, I'm in an emotional. I'm getting more emotional. I realize it's any second now I'm going to be crying my eyes out, but never mind. And then one particular babushka there, with a scarf and everything, lovely blue eyes. She said, I am not concerned about myself. I'm worried for my grandchildren. And the fact that this lady has come from so far away, and she's thinking about us, and she knows what's happening, that is really very important. And I had to leave. I had another appointment. As I walked down the front of this church, they all kind of surged towards me and were hugging me. And at that point, they all started to resemble my own great grandmother, in my mind. And I just cried. And it was kind of a cathartic moment. Because we Scots can be quite kind of inhibited about expressing emotions. And the taxi was waiting to take me, and there's a group of them. I've still got photographs of this, standing singing to see me off in the taxi. And that just kind of it kind of encapsulates, that's the word, the reason why I love people there so much, because of that genuine, authentic way in which they can express their feelings, which is something that I've had to learn.
Thank you. I will cry with you in a second. Alison, you've mentioned something interesting. You said that Belarusian language was much more widely spoken at that time, because since Lukashenko came to power, we had this massive, oppressive Russification, when Belarusian language is spoken, but not much, not everywhere. But now youngsters started picking up and start speaking Belarusian language. So, in your opinion, in villages and the remote locations where you were, how much of a Belarusian language was spoken at the time?
I definitely noticed it a lot, because I started to learn the differences. And then I also perceived that middle zone where there was Russian, but heavily influenced by Belarus, like pronunciation and vocabulary and so on. And then as the years went by, I realized that it was something that was under attack, that speaking Belarusian was seen as some sort of form of
protest against the government.
And therefore not to be encouraged. From that, I went on to read Belarusian literature, poetry in particular. I became dear friends with the famous British translator of Belarusian poetry, Vera Rich. And she introduced me to all kinds of other, not just the three main 19th century poets, but a whole lot of lesser known writers. And I started taking part in poetry recitals and so on with her all over the country. So I am glad to see it's a revival. And interestingly enough, I went to a conference on behalf of the Anglo-Belarus Society, comparing Scots language, not Gaelic, but Scots, to Belarusian, and the Belarusian linguists were there and Scottish linguists were there, and there was so much in common. So I was brought up to believe Scots was an inferior form of English. Right. And that's exactly how Belarusian is viewed by many, particularly Russians.
Yes, like inferior form of Russian or inferior form of Polish or in between. That's true.
And through that, I started to respect my own language, which has been driven out of me by my parents. I mean, I can go into it, but it just sounds wrong for me. But it's made me a lot more respectful, of my own language. So there've been benefits to me, to myself, from getting to know about Belarus and its people and its culture that I can't put a price tag on, to be honest. And that's the way it should be. It shouldn't just be one side giving to the other, that's the poor recipients, the victims. It should be a partnership where we're we're learning together and we're defining solutions together. I will never try to control how Belarusians wish to tackle their own issues. I need to be there to assist where needed, but otherwise to just let it happen. And that way, it'll be a Belarusian solution, not necessarily one that I think they should have.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for this wisdom. And Alison, could you please tell a little bit more about your work with scientists? Because I was particularly fascinated how you said that we have smuggled the earth from Belarus for analysis, for scientific analysis.
I'm a hooligan and all those things, and I've even got unsuitable clothes on today, the red and white. So I'm definitely I've been corrupted by Belarus. We were in the again in the contaminated zone, and we had some kind of soldiers and that with us. And usually we used to call them the Kent Gas Board, the KGB, because I kept the initials when I was a student. That's what we used to say. We've got the Kent Gas Board around. So as usual, that's the thing. And I had two clinicians from really wonderful people, two women. One was a hematologist and the other one was an endocrinologist, both from Aberdeen. And we had a scientist, a biomedical physicist with us from Aberdeen University. So we're wandering along and I don't know who muttered, we need to get some soil. And well, I said, why don't we women pretend that we need to go behind a bush, to answer the call of nature. And of course, I just went, oh, can we go? And of course, they're very big, strong men. No, don't these idiot women. So they just went, yeah, go on. Yeah, go on. So we sneaked behind this hut. It had a big skull and crossbones on the doorway with danger, radioactive, all that with the nuclear sign and skull and crossbones. So we went behind this deserted hut, and it was actually spring, so it was just thawing out. So the ground was pretty hard. So we were digging away, digging at this. Quick, hurry up, because they might see us. And we took chunks of soil in our handbags, and we took, thank God,
radioactive soil in your handbags. Wow,
that's wind power for you. I mean, I was in my 20s. So,
Maria Curie would have been proud of you.
I was at the age in my 20s where, you think you're immortal. So I didn't get there.
Yeah, definitely.
Old, we don't care. So we had this. But it was important because, we didn't have the younger ones are going to think, oh, my God, how did you live? There was no internet. So you didn't get the access to information. So you had to find other ways. So we got the soil samples analyzed, and they were extremely radioactive.
Oh my God.
Also, I remember the scientist said something. He was very cagey, actually, because he was being paid by British Nuclear Fuels to say that nuclear power is safe, So he was having a bit of a dilemma here. But he did say it looks like there's been more than one incident there. It wasn't just 26th April, because of the presence of certain elements in those samples would indicate that they'd had other major leakages before. But of course, with that was all covered up.
It's not surprising that it was all covered up, because in Belarus, people are saying that Chernobyl never stopped. That the disaster that started, that nuclear chain reaction, have never stopped. And despite the fact they've built huge sarcophagus on top of it, despite the fact that they're trying to do something to contain it within, from time to time, it does like a volcano, like a hazer. You can't keep it. It's going to have those puffs of whatever waste into the atmosphere, and it goes across the Europe. It goes everywhere. Yes. And that's something that is heavily suppressed. Belarusians authority never give it away. So we have no idea what's going on in Chernobyl, especially in England. We do maybe have some brave information from people like you who smuggle something, who give some intelligence. But it's
the thing about Belarus, and I know you know this more than me. Belarus, even more so than Russia, never actually left the Soviet Union in terms.
Yes, I know.
Like in Russia, there was a veneer of, suddenly the people, even the customs guy are asking you to rate your customs experience, like smiley faces and that. But like it's not, like it wasn't like that in the old days. But Lukashenko has really not made any efforts to.
He made all the efforts to bring everything back, and I think he plays a huge part in bringing back Soviet Union nouveau and all the neo-Stalinism and everything.
Nouveau sound much too elegant. I just, but so that lack of openness, lack of glassness is very much still in evidence. And yet it goes against the fact that now we've got young people digitally aware who are out there, and so this kind of dichotomy, and it's just how to, and it's so inevitably it's going to happen, because with those young people who've never known anything other than Lukashenko, you know, they are not going to put up with this secrecy and so forth. I mean, I worked with Gorbachev. I arranged for him to come to Scotland. Well, I was told to arrange it. It wasn't me. And I thought, I was interested that he was doing a lecture and he was getting paid £1,000 per table at this lecture for his Gorbachev Foundation. And he claimed that the funds were going to help Chernobyl victims. And of course, my instincts were saying, you know, hang on a minute, this is a Russian foundation under your name. So to what extent are the people living in the countries most affected, i.e. not Russia, to what extent will the funds be in any way? And I thought, I'd had quite a few glasses of wine by this time, so I tackled him and I said that. And I said, he said, oh, it's Russian, it's for Russia. And of course, you know, we know that it was for one Russian, i.e. himself. So I talked about this, and I also challenged him about the fact that they were still denying that they'd seeded the clouds over Belarus.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah,
was heading in the direction of Moscow. So they took the decision to do that using that technology from the Moscow Olympics to bring down that. That's why people talk about that unusually heavy rain that happened. I understand that Putin eventually did accept that had happened, but at the time, no, absolutely not. So even he, despite all of his lovely words about glasnost, perestroika, etc., there was still a huge part of him that was embedded in the old ways too.
At the time, after he said that there's going to be glasnost and perestroika, everybody were shocked that there were no glasnost and perestroika as such when things came towards something serious, and there were no mechanism in place to carry out that glasnost and perestroika. So it was very well to say that we will do it now, but there were no mechanism, nothing in place for security of people. So it was just, oh my God, we are not prepared for taking care of people because we never did. So we don't know how to do it now. And our war is now, we're preparing a march, the Chernobyl Way, on the 25th in London. And we don't know what is happening now with the new nuclear station they've built in Ostrovets. We have no idea. There are absolutely no mechanism in place to tell the society what's really going on. There's no way of asking them and receiving the truthful answer.
Gone round in the circle again. So it's gone right round and it's back to where it started.
So it's almost, we didn't have a chance to learn anything from Chernobyl, and except of suffer, there were no new things put in place, unless I'm missing something, because international community, of course, did a big work, and it was something that people were really worried about.
All of that was helpful. This is my quite controversial opinion that some of these things, like the Chernobyl children initiatives, not all of them, but some of them caused more problems than they actually created benefits. And I'm really concerned about labeling young people as Chernobyl children, you know, rather than, you know, I'd rather see them as potential, you know, active citizens in a new Belarus, and not carry around the Chernobyl label. But that's just me. I just used to feel, and then the amount of trouble it caused in those communities in Belarus, because how come that child's been chosen and this one hasn't? Well, that one's father.
Yeah, that's true. How more of a Chernobyl you than me, because it's actually the whole country was under Chernobyl.
This is why I do, really focus on building capacity within Belarus, because there's enormous capacity amongst people in Belarus, as we're seeing every day that people go out on the streets there. So yeah, I think it's great that we're having this in London. Certainly is Sunday.
From Trafalgar Square, on the corner near Portrait Gallery, we meet there. It's away from to the Belarusian embassy.
Yeah, it's definitely looking at, right, this is what happened. Belarus is in a period of change, which will inevitably be for the better, because it has to be. What lessons can we bring forward into a new Belarus from the past? So it's not that we want to forget the past, and we don't want
to move on.
We don't want to close the door on it either. It's about what can we take from all those experiences from our parents and our grandparents that can contribute to a new Belarus where things like that will never happen again.